Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Survivor 50 Wishlist podcast, an off-season series where we're determining who could and should come back for the upcoming returning season of Survivor 50. And today, break out your crispy rice and your best pair of pink undies as we are talking Survivor Redemption Island, commonly regarded as one of, if not the worst Survivor season in the show's history. But are there some diamonds in the rough? We are here trying to figure all that out. Of course, I am Mike Bloom, and today I am joined by truly a fantastic guest. We are usually conditioned to asking him anything, and so today we're going to ask him particularly who he wants to see back from Survivor Redemption Island. It is, of course, from David versus Goliath, the fantastic Dr. Christian Hubicki. Hey, Christian.
Hey there, Mike. How you doing? It's good to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. I am so excited about this. Truly to take on a Goliath-esque effort of having to spend at max an hour talking about Survivor Redemption Island and its cast. I could think of no better David to do so than yourself.
Well, that's kind of see you to say, Mike. I have been one to enjoy the occasional endurance challenge. In a way, Redemption Island, we're watching it, is its own kind of endurance challenge at times. And there are moments of joy and interest, but yeah, it's an experience, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's the thing is, look, I have always said that every Survivor season, we don't need to necessarily completely throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are always elements to take away and even occasionally appreciate. And for what it's worth, I liked the first few episodes of Redemption Island. I think the premiere is absolutely out of whack, where we get introduced to Philip and his full force from the beginning with his close alliance turned rivalry in the moment with Francesca. We have everything going on with Boston Rob making the first big move of the season by cutting Matt from eyeballing perhaps a younger version of himself on Ometepe. And we have, for the first time in his Survivor career, Russell Hantz being voted out due to a basically tribe-wide effort to dispose of him. From then on, maybe it takes a little bit of a step down. I think many reasons why people certainly regard this as a lesser than season, besides the fact that it does reside in the dark ages of Survivor, is of course the gameplay is stagnant to say the least. I think the advent of bringing in these two returning players, we saw it in Guatemala, but to see Boston Rob pretty much put on a showcase as to how to run the most dominant game, arguably, in Survivor history, could make for entertaining television for some people, quite the opposite for others. The concept of Redemption Island, even to this day, with things like Edge of Extinction, is still a little controversial given the lack of finality that comes with the vote out. And we'll get into this, but the cast in general, a little uninspired at the time, particularly when it comes to One Tribe. But Christian, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What are your thoughts on Redemption Island? Does it buck the conventional wisdom or go along with it?
Oh, I don't think I come in with any particularly hot take on changing the conventional wisdom, other than to say that going back and jumping straight back to watching Survivor 22, it did remind me that of one things that have changed over that time in terms of the change in the hosting of Jeff, a little bit of the hosting style, the style of the challenges. Um, there are changes, but I will say, even with this season, where there are points where Boston Rob is just on a steamroller, rolling over these players to the end, there's always interesting things in a Survivor season. Even these
Mm.
seasons that I hear people say that they don't like very much, and I see what they're getting for. There's always something interesting in a Survivor season to take away. I mean, just the gameplay of Boston Rob going down to the end is something to behold. And I was sitting at home watching it with Emily, and we were picking up new things every time we went through this season. And it's not just Boston Rob, it's some of the other players too, which we'll go through all of them. You can see what they're going for in their minds as far as the game goes. But it definitely is in an era where casting was in a mode where they didn't necessarily want to find people who knew the game particularly well. I think they probably, for reasons that might have made sense at the time, said, it doesn't really matter how huge of a fan people are of the show. We just want to get personalities and people who will be good on TV. That's all you need, right, for a reality show, right? Well, this is we're not. This is not The Genius. This is Survivor. You only have to count to 10 for your votes. And but I think what you found is that when there's disparity in the skill and experience, frankly, this experience of the players, this is what can happen. And so what I felt when I was watching this was an increased. I always had an appreciation for Boston Rob,
Mm,
but a yet again increased appreciation for how skilled that he is at handling the game. Comes with experience and comes with just raw talent and effort. But also, I felt bad for a lot of these new players because some of them at least had some concept of what to do. And if they were only on there with new players, you could see some of them being able to take the reins and be a lot more interesting. But I don't care how good, talented of a first time player you are, you come up against someone who's played 4 times, this can happen. So
mm.
that was my overall impression. That it's like was there was interesting stuff there, but there was also and stuff to appreciate. But I did feel bad for the new players, which maybe some of them should get a second chance.
How dare
Maybe we
you
should talk about
say
that.
yeah, how dare you say Survivor players only need to know how to count to 10? Do you not recall the iconic Redemption Island duel where they had to count to 100 using tiles?
Hey, you throw one challenge, if you're gonna skip one skill on Survivor, it's counting above 11. That's, instead you should be practicing what? Grip strength? Is that what the kids say these days? Yeah,
Exactly.
something like
Well,
that.
let us
Yeah.
try to get a grip on these castaways. Let's just jump into it. And we got to start as you have been with this conversation, and as we usually do when talking about Redemption Island with Boston Rob, because I decided to put a pin in him back when I was talking Survivor Marquesas, saying, like, listen, we have much more exciting players to talk about who have not had the chance to come back. We'll talk about the 5-time player later on when he actually does come back and win. We have arrived at that fateful day where Boston Rob, yeah, 4th time was the charm. He puts on this absolute masterclass of a performance in terms of whether it's weaponizing the opposition, whether it is very specifically curtailing a majority and then a majority within that majority to handpick the goats that he wants to go to the end with for the perfect combination for him to take away the win. So, look, the fact of the matter is, for this experiment's sake, we have been prognosticating for a possible Legends season. And so a lot of people that I would not necessarily see coming back, a Sandra, a Parvati, even a Rupert. We put on it because A, they haven't like explicitly said no, I would never do it, never, ever, ever. And also, again, because we kind of want to cast the net wide at this point without a specific theme for 50, depending on what direction they want to go in. I would say of the legends, Boston Rob would probably be the hardest no to it. He has gone on record quite a few times, including as recent as, his Deal or No Deal Island exit press saying, if they bring me back to Survivor, it's got to be, a really special theme, or it's got to be a hook that really brings me back on board. I think he has gotten every single thing out of his Survivor experience and then some. And he also, I think, has the same motto as someone like Parvati has, which is like, are they really going to let me walk in for the 6th, 7th, umpteenth time and not vote me out pre-merge? Like, come on, my reputation precedes me and then some. But again, for the more, I guess, fictionalized aspect of this entire experiment, Christian, I'd be remiss not to put him on the ballot here.
So he is currently, just to be clear, just because the timing can be weird as to when we film these
Yes.
podcasts, he is not currently on the second chance ballot to be voted on by the esteemed listeners of Rob Has a Podcast.
Correct, because we usually only put people on the ballot during seasons that involve some form of new players. We pass them over from our cases because we're like, we'll talk about it during Redemption Island, and not to put the cart before the horse too much, which I'm pretty sure is the cart they had to push along in that opening challenge. But I have a feeling the pickings might be slimmer today than they were in Marquesas. So I felt now would be the time to put Rob on. And also, let's bring up the other sort of time travel elephant in the room here. Boston Rob has, of course, been announced to be on The Traitors season 3. And I think on paper, some would say that would preclude people like him, Tony, Jeremy, Carolyn, especially from being on Survivor 50. But Christian, you might know the whole contract legalese of it more than me, considering that you faced with it first and foremost. I think there are certainly ways, depending on demand, to be able to accomplish two at once.
Yeah, I would not completely erase legally the ability for someone like a Boston Rob to return. That is not my impression of I've only ever been on one reality show ever, but from my
As
understanding,
of now,
uh, sure. But that the legalese of this, I think there are ways he could come back. So he's not legally precluded. I am totally on board with putting him on the ballot. It would be. I know that there are people who are not necessarily the giantest Boston Rob fans. I'm not necessarily one of those people. He's got to be on the ballot. You got to vote for people to come back. And Boston Rob, he's the probably the only person who's a survivor who is essentially a household name.
mhm.
Okay, and I would kind of want you're a survivor historian of sorts, Mike. Like I would curious to get your take on this. I mean, Boston Rob gets name checked on like 30 Rock as a
Yeah.
name, right? I mean, as much as Rupert or Sandra are very popular, well-known survivor players, you say those to a person those people are famous to survivor fans. Boston Rob is basically famous to also non-survivor fans. People have heard the name probably Boston Rob, those two words in a sentence together, and have a flicker of recollection to them.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit of cheating because I would say, like, does Jimmy Johnson count? Does your
Sure.
co-star Mike White count? But excluding that, I feel like I would definitely ascribe that label to him if you're talking about like what name from Survivor has stood the test of time. If we're going back to the early 2000s, I mean, it was all about Richard Hatch. It was all about Colby Donaldson. Those were definitely household names due to just the popularity of Survivor. But I do think if you look back, especially from a modern day lens, and people are saying, who do you sort of synonymize with Survivor from a contestant perspective? I think the most populous answer, maybe not most popular, but the one that would sort of cover the widest swath would be somebody like Boston Rob. Certainly helps that he has, again, played the most seasons out of anybody, has been somebody that has shown his face across multiple seasons, multiple reunions, even something like Karamoan, where he was referenced but not seen. He shows up in the audience as well. And so this is someone who kind of becomes, a part of the survivor mythos, obviously from nearly the beginning with his courtship of Amber on the show, but really has stood the test of time to the point where they erected a giant ass statue of him 5 years ago.
Yeah, so you can't not put him on the ballot. It would simply it would be a blemish, I think, on the ballot to not have Boston Rob on it and let the
And here, and
fans decide if they want to see him for a seventh time.
that's the thing, is that I can completely understand, and people have certainly been vocal about it as far back as our Marquesas podcast of like, I don't want to see Boston Rob for the umpteenth time. I personally get it as well. I don't know if Boston Rob himself would want to do it necessarily, though. Again, I think what we've been saying with some of these other players is that I do think the idea of a Legends season, no matter how much you might prognosticate your fate, might be enough to just get called back for that label alone. But also, that being said, the power will be in y'all's hands after this. If you don't want him on the season, don't vote for him. Unlike the Redemption Island jury. And I will talk next about the man to his right, someone who did receive one jury vote from Ralph Kaiser, may he rest in peace, and finished in second place. Philip Shepard, I think far and away the other person to talk about from this season besides Boston Rob. Love him, hate him, no matter what. Everyone on and off screen was talking about Philip, the validity of was he a former federal agent, the pink underwear, everything that was going on throughout his various confrontations in the season, Jessamine Herring, etc. We don't need to dote on Philip too much when it comes to returnee chances because in his quarantine questionnaire, when asked if he would play again, he responded in all caps, "No, I would not ever subject myself to another reality TV competition again, regardless of how many press releases they put out about being inclusive and diverse. I think the format of Survivor, the theme, the game, and many of the staff are well intentioned. However, what was allowed to happen to Black contestants was devastating in our lives, and our stories have not been told." Philip talked in his quarantine questionnaire about how he felt he was given a raw edit. Also, from a production perspective, it seems like he said that like the pink underwear was pretty much forced onto him by production, which then led to him getting clowned upon by his cast members and the edit. So suffice it to say, despite making I would say, a fairly impressive run in Karamoan by comparison, I think Philip is in many ways done with Survivor.
I I read that same questionnaire, and yeah, I think exactly. That's one that's hard to walk back at that point. And I feel like we got Philip twice. And one thing from watching him in the season, it had been a long time, and I understand. Oh, I understand why they brought him back right away again, or at least there was rumors they're going to bring him back almost exactly right
Yep.
away for season 23 at one point. So I genuinely laughed at a lot of the things that Phillips did and said when I was watching again, and I think that he's one of the people on this season who understood it wasn't just a game that you wanted to perform well in. He also understood it was a TV show he wanted to perform in, at least to some degree. Not to saying that he was completely inauthentic, but like he gave us content from a television show standpoint. And so naturally he made sense to bring back in the middle of the 20s.
So we have the slam dunk in Rob. We have the person that is opted out from stepping foot on the court in Philip. But let's talk about somebody similar to that theming who came onto Survivor as an NBA dancer. Let's talk about Natalie Tenorelli. Because I think on paper, I could see people be like, everything that's wrong with Redemption Island is represented in Natalie. Here is this like 21-year-old girl, or no, sorry, she's
19. She
19.
was 19 at the
19, yeah.
time.
I mixed her up with Andrea. Yes, she was 19 at the time and very clearly in over her head, where she ends up falling in line with Boston Rob from the very beginning through to the very end, much to the chagrin of people like Andrea and Ashley, who try at the last minute to buck her to turn against Rob. Natalie was on the ballot for second chances, and unfortunately did not make the final cast. But I do think, Christian, there's some there. I could be talked either way into putting her on the short list. But first off, we've been talking about this throughout the process. There is some appeal to bringing back somebody who is older and presumably wiser. Of course, Natalie is 33 right now, and suffice it to say, she knows a lot more about the world than she did at the age of 19. She's also done a lot with her life. For those that don't necessarily know, she's no longer a dancer. She actually did find love with another reality star in the form of former Bachelorette star Dan Cox. And they actually started a business together during COVID where she expanded on, I think it was like her family's peach farm, right? And started selling peaches locally, which is pretty wild. And also, for what it's worth, she's raring to go. Maybe it's that second chance is kind of lit that fire back from her after a few years away. But when asked if she'd come back, she say, yes, if given the opportunity, I would go back. My heart starts beating really fast at the thought of my return. Eck. I think she meant eek, but she put a lot of K's in there instead of E's. I feel like I'm such old news, though. Maybe one day it will happen. And this is the interesting part, Christian. Jeff did write me a note after I didn't make it back on second chance saying, quote, we do want you back. We just have to wait for the right season. We'll see. What do you think, Christian, about the possibility of Nat 10 on Survivor 50?
So if we're talking about the possibility of the show having an interest there, I can understand the show potentially seeing a story to put her back on the show. I mean, I had the same when I was watching her on this season. I was like, wow, he is so young. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that was and like it just read on television, and I felt a lot of empathy for Natalie because I actually don't know much about her history of how she got onto the show in the first place. Maybe you know something about that, Mike. But it came across to me like this is a person who happened across this opportunity at a very young age. It's like, hey, do you want to go on this national TV show and a competition for $1 million? I mean, if many of us plucked off the street, I don't know her backstory, would say yes. But then not necessarily realize exactly what you're signing up for, especially when you're put on a season where you're on a tribe with someone who is a seasoned professional at this game and ready to use you as a way to get to the end. I hear they're close thereafter, which is wonderful. But
Mm-hmm.
so I felt a lot of empathy for her. So the story of bringing her back, I feel it was a great second chance story. And so I
Mm.
think it made a lot of sense to put her on the second chance ballot. And honestly, I think that Survivor should do something like a second chance again. They just have they have so many one-time players now. That bench is so deep. And no matter what they do for 50, unless they put 100 people on the island, they're gonna have a lot of people that they left behind or have interesting stories that they never got to see again. And so I think that unless season 50 is something like a second chance type story, I think that it would make sense to do whatever they want to do for 50. Who the heck knows what that's going to be? And then at some point in the future, just do something like a second chance. And that's the kind of thing I think swinging in Natalie Tenorelli would make sense for. Yeah.
So, listen, that being said, are you putting forward this theme in due part because that would perhaps benefit a certain someone from David versus Goliath as an example? I'm sort of, I sort of buried the lead here, but I've been doing this with all the alumni I've had the fortune of talking with on this podcast. Just for the record, Christian, if you were given the chance to come back for Survivor 50, no matter what the theme would it be an easy yes for you?
I definitely take the call. I mean, if they called me for 50, I mean, it's like being invited to like Survivor's big birthday party. What do? Say no? Like just hang up the phone? It just like it's like no. I mean, it would be quite an honor to get a call for the season, and I'd be interested. I'd have interest in going. I mean, there's a lot of factors at play, but I'd be interested. I mean, it's such a milestone year. I mean, it might be the last Survivor milestone. I mean, in terms of numbers, you never know. People would have said that about Survivor 10,
Mm.
20 years ago. But so you never know. Maybe Jeff will bow out after Survivor 100. Who knows? But at this rate, but I mean, it's such an event that it would. I think that someone like myself would be honored to take the call, and and depending upon what they have in mind, it might make sense. Nice thing is that I'm tenured now,
Mm.
so I which is cool, and they tend to film during the summer, so that's actually a pretty good timing for me. But we'll see.
All right.
But yeah,
Well,
but that's not the reason I brought up second chance. I think even if I suddenly tomorrow was like, you know what, I hate this show now. I never do it again. I would say it's in the best interest of the show to do something like a second chances.
completely, yeah.
Yeah, like they just have so many great people that I would want to see all together again on my television screen.
All right, well, let's see if any of those people are contained in the jury of Survivor Redemption Island. We have working our way up here David Murphy, who pulls the full Murphy in stumping for Boston Rob and causing, I would say, the most awkward reunion moment in Survivor history, especially in retrospect when he proposes to Carolina. We have Julie Wolf, the firefighter who vindictively buried Philip's underwear for a little while. We have Steve Wright, a former NFL player who ends up getting into a big argument with Philip that turns into quite a literal different discussion. We have, of course, the late Ralph Kaiser, the rooster himself, who found an idol before Russell did. We have Grant, who was another NFL vet and the quietest member of Stealth R Us, maybe the stealthiest, in fact, who gets perhaps the most burned by Boston Rob, but pales in comparison to, of course, Matt Elrod, who gets voted out second due to Rob, comes back from Redemption Island, and then gets immediately sent back to Redemption Island via Rob, makes his way to the end and loses out in the final duel or quadrule or whatever you want to call it. We have Mike Cheezel, who was an Iraq War veteran and was seen as kind of like the Captain American figurehead of the Zapatera Alliance, who was voted out pretty much at the merge and made his way all the way to the end. We have our main returnee besides Boston Rob from this season in the form of three-time player Andrea Belke. And we have our fallen angel here in Ashley Underwood, who was one immunity challenge away from possibly winning this entire game. But I want to take a step back and focus on Andrea here because Andrea has played three times. She's one of the rare Survivor players, besides, I think, Amanda and Sarah Lucina, to make the jury for a 3+ time player every single time that she has played. When asked if she would play again, she responded, probably. I have to be honest, it takes a huge toll on me mentally. Something about watching the show and having people rip you apart online gets to me. I'm not usually an anxious person, but I had such extreme anxiety when my seasons were airing and it wasn't healthy. I love the game so much, and I do feel like I have it in me to win the game, but I'll just have to see where I'm at in my life. Okay, fine, I'll play again. And so that inner monologue, I think, showcases that Andrea just doesn't know how to quit Survivor. But Christian, do we want to bring her back for time number 4?
Yeah, I mean, so from this first time out, I definitely see why she got brought back for 26. I like her a lot. I like Andrea. I liked her at the time. I still like her now as a television character. I never got to meet her. That'd be cool. But she's got spunk to her in the sense that she knows and understands how to put together a good effort. I mean, her narrative of this season, I actually remember this season quite fondly in a lot of ways, Mike, because I
Mm,
think that this is the first season I was watching when I started applying for the show. And before when I was sort of just watching the show. So when the cast, this is the first time when the cast would come out, I would say, "Oh, who actually got on? What
mm.
kind of people are being cast?" And I would actually go read all their bios and learn about them. And Andrea's thing was that she was like the tomboy type. That
Yeah, that
she
she
grew
was
up on
like,
a
yeah,
farm.
the farm girl.
Yeah, and I think she is. I think in time since I've heard her say things like, that's not really all of her, and she's definitely transcended this personality, and now she's like does People magazine stuff, right? As a like a presenter type thing, and so like she's very telegenic. She has
Mm,
her TV presence. I would not be mad at her seeing her again. I think that the thing that would be challenging from a ballot perspective is what is the thing that she has done on the show that she is known for that she brings to the cast? That would be the thing my biggest struggle in terms of putting her on. So like right now she's on the bubble for me of
yeah.
all the people I put on the list, but I think she is definitely very memorable. Like to me, like I say to me, I remember her like when I saw her in Game Changers, like that kind of makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
okay. I wouldn't. I mean, Game Changers didn't make sense, but like her on a cast makes sense. And like, okay, so like I don't think I'd ever be mad to see Andrea. I just need to know like what is her driving thesis, what she's gonna do this time on the show. She didn't do the other times. And if I get that from her, I'd be like, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree in that, listen, as this entire experiment has shown, I am not against bringing back people who have played like 2 or 3 times and maybe didn't have like the most complete and memorable resume across the board. Someone like Candace as an example. But I feel like what differs with Candace is just the idea of off-screen narrative, which has been a large driving force for why I sometimes put people on this list, is that we have people like a Daniel DiLorenzo, for example, go off the show, get married, have children. How does that approach the mentality you approach the game when you end up coming back onto it? And not to say that like Andrea should have gotten married and started a family in the time since Game Changers, but she has led a very good consistent life throughout her time on Survivor, both on and off. Obviously, making it work in the entertainment industry, as you mentioned, having this consistent role with people. I would also say that maybe on paper, people would be like, well, she went out and covered, other seasons of Survivor, so that would preclude her. She covered the show and then went on to play Game Changers and then talked about Game Changers on Pen Fan Forum. May it rest in peace. So I don't think that's necessarily a non-starter. And I really enjoy Andrea. I also correct myself that I do believe that Ozzy and Joe Anglim and Jeremy are also some of these other rarefied players that have made the merge every time. But she's like a very solid player overall. I think maybe my
Yeah.
favorite season from her is maybe something like Kara Moen, where she finally gets into power really for the first time in her Survivor career and gets to do fun things like babysitting Malcolm, like getting Eric to give her the idol, and then she gets voted out with it. Like that's the fun that can come with bringing back these players is getting to see a different side of their gameplay. To your point, I'm wondering what is necessarily the newfound appeal in bringing back Andrea for a fourth time, besides like, oh, I like Andrea and I want to see her play again. I think she's a bit different than some of these other players we're bringing back time and time again because of the legends aspect, proverbial speaking. This would be more so, well, we like Andrea Belke and we want to see her on TV again.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I imagine. And the other thing I'll say for her, but before we move on to our many other cast members, otherwise it'll be a 500-minute podcast, I guess. But the Andrea also, she did have varied reactions to being voted out multiple times. She's been voted
Mm,
out 4 times in her 3
true.
appearances,
Yeah.
and and I'll never forget how impressed I was with her in Caramello when she got voted out. She was very genial. It's like, hey, you guys, good job. I was like, oh, good. That's the kind of response that I enjoy. It's like, hey, good job, and they leave and they walk out the door. And then in Game Changers, she was a lot less happy with Zeke.
Yes.
So like I was like, oh, I didn't think I would see that side of Andrea. So there are multiple personality dimensions that will pop out every once in a while. So it's sort of the unknown as to what you might get out of her. But overall, I think she's on the bubble for me if we're looking for a third person.
Yeah, wasn't her like voting confessional when she voted for Zeke that one time along the lines of like terrible move, hope to see you never.
That's pretty much the quote.
So let's move on to somebody that she was canoodling a bit during their brief time together on Redemption Island. I do want to talk about Matt Elrod because, again, I think if you talk about the stars of this season are maybe a bit few and far between compared to other seasons, but Matt is certainly somebody to talk about. He is, of course, the first person to return from Redemption Island and then gets immediately sent there back again. I think a large sub story of this entire season is like Matt's eternal struggle with just being put in this Job like position, true to his faith, of having to suffer out there in isolation, even when he's surrounded by people, consistently being tested physically, mentally, emotionally, and trying to figure out why exactly is he meant to do this. And then it all kind of ends anticlimactically for him when we think it's being built up as, oh, he's going to come back to the game again. And even the people that are currently on the Merlonial tribe say, oh, yeah, Matt's probably coming back once more. And it doesn't happen. Kind of unceremoniously, he ends up getting sent out. But if Matt didn't build a resume for himself on Island, he certainly did off in a very different way. Of course, for the uninitiated, Matt has certainly made a cup for himself in Hollywood in a very different way than Andrea, considering all the roles he has played under the name of Wyatt Nash. But if his change in name is of any indication, he is very clearly done with the survivor phase of his life. He even affirms in his quarantine questionnaire that he was asked back a couple of times following Redemption Island, but it's very clear for many reasons this was just something that he would be one and done with.
So yeah, at first I was very confused. I looked at my list. I didn't have Matt on it. I had someone named Wyatt Nash. Now I
Yeah.
understand why.
You're
The
such a big Riverdale fan that that's all
yeah,
he is to you.
pretty much, and I'm a pretty little liar myself, so I figured that this would be a the and when it comes to yeah, when it comes to Matt, yeah, I think that he's out. I don't think he's interested. The thing I'll say for Matt is a little on the lines of Natalie. He's someone I have a lot of empathy for as a person who went on the show because everything about his experience on the island and what he talks about off the island is that he wanted to go out there and be a representative of his faith and religion or
Mm.
his conception of God, whatever that is. And again, so I liken it to like, what if I was approached on the street and say, "Hey, Christian, do you want to go on this big show for $1 million?" I'm like, well, okay, do I want to do that? I mean, $1 million is nice, but is it beyond that? What maybe I can represent something about what I believe in. Maybe I could go out there and talk about science and things like that on national TV and really get my thing out there. But if I didn't understand the format of the show, like from a deep level, what the format of the show was, then I could end up in Matt's position very easily.
Mm.
Now Matt said something to the effect on the season that he had watched the first season with his parents and he remembered it. My guess is that he wasn't a huge fan and he just went out there, as this experience, and didn't necessarily enjoy the ride. So I felt for him on this timeout.
Yeah, I think it was clear even in the brief votes that he participated in, particularly at the merge, that I think Survivor was not necessarily the game for him. Where, if we don't remember, it is obviously Omotepe versus Zapatera, and Matt is caught in the middle. Where, okay, do you go with the people who spurned you, or do you go with these completely new faces? And he does relent and end up going back to Omotepe, to which he is very open to Boston Rob of like, oh, by the way, I had offers from other, employers, but I chose to go with your company. And Boston Rob's like, okay, great, you're fired. So I think that Matt is somebody who, and he was also 21 when he played. So I think it was just a matter of his head and his mentality towards Survivor was not necessarily in line with a lot of other stuff that was happening in the season. But I wish him the best of luck with his acting career. I want to talk about Ashley Underwood here.
Good
Because
choice.
again, I think like Natalie, Ashley on paper, the first question you ask is who? And the second question you ask is like, okay, well, what did she do? And yes, Ashley was someone that, like Natalie, was pretty quiet. She was 25, which made her a couple of years older at least than some of her contemporaries on this Ometepe tribe. But Ashley really came alive towards the end of the season when Rob was starting to see her as a big threat, especially as someone that could win sort of the Natalie proxy war and get her to her side over him. And so he decides that he's going to start taking aim at her, starting at once Andrea ends up leaving. But then Ashley sticks around. She's able to comp beast out a little bit. She was a former college basketball player, and she ends up winning her way to the Final Four. And again, I really do feel, as much as I, look so highly upon Boston Rob's Redemption Island game, I think part of the reason why he dominated is because he had to get to the end with those two particular people. I think it has been said that if Ashley gets to the end, even alongside Rob, there is a fairly good shake that she ends up winning. Ashley has, since the season has aired, I believe her boyfriend came out there on Redemption Island for the family visit. She has since married said boyfriend, and she started a family very quickly after that. She currently has two kids, which I believe at this point are probably around like 10 and 7. And what's very interesting, Christian, is that Ashley affirmed in her quarantine questionnaire she was asked to play a few times. The timing wasn't right. The first time she was asked, she was pregnant, and then and her first baby was 9 months old. I would imagine that was probably like a Karamoan, maybe even second chances time. But it seems that now that her kids are, well taken care of and actually functioning human beings, seems like as of 2020 she would want to play again.
I went and read her quarantine questionnaire because I was curious about Ashley because I agreed by the end of the game she became a threat to Boston Rob. Boston Rob made that abundantly clear to the point where I think it was really starting to get to him.
Yeah.
It's like it's just like, and I think that there's something there with an Ashley like that, and she could have won that final immunity challenge. She was real close. Like what? How different of a season is Redemption Island if she wins that final immunity challenge? I'm assuming she votes out Boston Rob. I
I
assume I
guess the
forget what.
question is, could she convince Philip and Natalie to do the same?
That's a good question. She only needs one of them, and in order to force a fire making tiebreaker, and maybe
Yeah,
Boston
but
Rob
I feel
would
like
win that.
Boston would, yeah, probably
Yeah,
clean up in fire making,
yeah.
considering he
So
had at that
maybe
point like nearly 100 days of Survivor under his belt.
so someone like Ashley's who has I think she's got a hunger to come back, is the impression I get from her questionnaires and things like that. I think that she would really want to, and again, she feels like a second chance story to me. And clearly
Yeah.
production thinks she's got something going on if they keep calling her about future seasons. I think that the if I were to come up with criterion for just this our podcast together, Mike, where I'm going to talk about who would come back on 50, it would be people I'd put on are more than just the hypothetical of what they might do given a second chance. I would like to see some spark of what actually happened on that season,
Mm.
so that way, oh, I have personally seen that thing, which is great. They should be on this big landmark 50 season. Now,
Yeah.
I think that again, this is why I'm in an opinion they should do some other season where they bring back people like Ashley. I think she'd be a wonderful second chance candidate. I think that clearly um, they're thinking of her, but they did choose Natalie and Stephanie Valencia.
Yeah.
We'll get to her in a bit as spots for that. But I think that there's something like a second chance is a great spot for someone where production saw something and maybe
Mhm.
want to give them a second shot. Hey, give them a second shot. They might have like a Kelly Wentworth.
Yeah. Touching upon some other members of the jury here, I feel like maybe at the time there was something there with Mike. I feel like maybe the time has eclipsed to bring someone like him back, but the fact was he was super likable, was seen as probably the biggest threat on Zapatera, to the point where a lot of discussion amongst Merlonio was, okay, who's gonna beat Matt and who's gonna beat Mike? Because he was also somebody that was one spot away. Had he beaten Andrea, he comes back into the game and maybe he immediately gets voted out again. But certainly, I think probably like the best perfect package of a player on the Zapatera tribe. And he did say that he would come back, but I'm sort of in and out on him. The others in the forms of Grant, Steve, Julie, David. The latter three I enjoy from a certain aspect. I actually am a low key Steve Wright fan. I thought he brought some very fun sort of beleaguered moments to the post
Mhm.
merge, especially. But nobody's really piquing my radar. I think maybe, again, if we were doing this for like Survivor 25, David Murphy might make my short list because it's like, oh, this is sort of what we'll talk about next week in Jim Rice. Of, oh, here's this kind of schemy, more strategic guy who ends up getting taken out right at the merge due to sort of a bad tribal draw, and then ends up becoming the first member of the jury. Let's give him a second shot. But I don't know, maybe it's that image of that cringy proposal and everything thereafter playing in my head that I don't need to necessarily see him back.
So just to plow through a few of these that you just talked about. I mean, Mike is a guy who as of the last I read when I was trying to study up for this podcast, he seems pretty hungry to come back. That's when me
Mm,
reading between the lines. Like he's been contacted a few times. Like, yeah, I'm interested. I get the feeling though that he would jump at the chance.
hmm
That's my personal take. And I think that he was one of the people that at least was trying to mount an insurrection with Boston against Boston Rob at the merge. He was trying to get. He was the other employer who was trying to hire Matt Elrod, Wyatt Nash
mm,
for the alliance. So he at least took action, and I actually like the. He's one of the people I saw something and how
mm,
he was literally playing the game. It wasn't like transcendent, but like he worked Matt Elrod pretty well at the merge, tried to find some common cause with him over the Bible. And like I saw elements of a game there that
mm.
of all these people you're talking about, he would be the one that would be closest to the bubble of putting on the
Yeah,
list for me.
I agree with that.
Um, yeah, so Grant, it's in our household. It's the joke is that he has gotten more mad over time about being voted out by Boston Rob.
Yeah.
So whenever
To the
there's
point
something
that I think, honestly, he has passed Lex in the salt meter.
Yeah, and so anytime I'm mad about something increasingly over time, I say I'm totally granting over this situation right now. So like so that's fun. I hope he's doing well. I agree with you on Steve and Julie and David. I think David would have been fun for a really near-term return just
Yeah.
because he is so self-confident. He's fascinatingly self-confident in everything he does. And we just didn't get to see him do nothing he of his machinations became anything crazy in the season. And I do have one Ralph Kaiser story
Oh,
before
yes,
we do
please.
move on. So yeah, so Ralph Kaiser, of course, has sadly passed away. I remember when I was on the island. I had found the immunity idol, much like Ralph, not in amongst between something alive and something dead. And I pulled a producer aside because I knew I was going to probably play my idol coming up. And I was like, look, this idol is a little filthy. Just tell Jeff to have going to hand it to him to have some kind of hand sanitizer nearby. I feel bad for Jeff handing him this idol. It's all grimy and whatever. And he's like, oh, Christian, don't worry. When Ralph was about to play his idol, he told us, I hope Jeff likes Pecker.
Ah! Oh,
So
unless Ralph was, like, propositioning Jeff, maybe. There was a different euphemism there.
No. In terms of specifically the idol
Okay.
griminess. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry I have to edit that out of the podcast. But
No, no,
anyway,
please. That is
so
an incredible button on the legacy of Ralph Kaiser. I really hope he said that in the moment as well as he was walking up to play that on. I believe he played it on Mike at the merch.
yeah, it's like yeah. I think Mike's like you notice he didn't hand it to Mike to go
Yeah.
give it to Jeff, and I think that he's like I'm playing on Mike. And so anyway, that's my little minorest of 1 degree of separation from Ralph Kaiser to
Yeah,
that
much
producer.
like Jeff was 1 degree of separation from a part of Ralph Kaiser when it came to playing that idol.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll say about Julie, the one thing we got from her in the post merger, she's mad. She was
Yes.
angry. That's she has an angry revenge streak on her.
All right,
So
well
yeah.
let's get into our pre-mergers here because there is a little bit of there to discuss. Working our way down, actually, we have Sarita who ends up being cast out from this very tight majority alliance that forms on Zapatera. We have the two people that are on said outs of Zapatera in the form of Stephanie Valencia and Krista. We have Christina, who is cast out from the beginning, but holds the commendation of, I believe, had one of the earliest idol finds in Survivor history. We have, of course, Russell Hantz returning for his third and to this point latest US Survivor season, where everyone decides to band together and get rid of the so-called bandy-legged troll, which then culminates in him losing to Matt at Redemption Island. And we have the only two-time first boot in Survivor history in Francesca Hogi. Now look, we all like to be little clowns here in the Survivor fan base and say, wouldn't it be great if they brought back Francesca a third time so she could be voted out first? And she sees you all coming and she's getting out ahead of you because she said in her quarantine questionnaire, to my great shock and honor, I have been asked to play again. It was an easy no. It becomes an easier no with each passing day. Even if I wanted to play again, I promise you I'd go home first again. I'm the easiest vote ever, and I'm 10 years older. I really don't have the personality for the game. I just can't pretend to like people I don't like, not even for $1 million. I have no talent for lying or intentional manipulation. I really love my creature comforts. My point being, why would I want to subject myself to Survivor? So, suffice it to say, I think she's eaten enough rocks in her life to walk away from the show.
Let Francesca live her life. That's what I say. Let her live her life. She's doing great from what I can see. Go on with one's bad self.
I do want to ask you about Russell because when I talked with Evie, certainly it was the hot topic of debate, of course, in Survivor Samoa about this was the Russell show, but what are his chances given everything that's happened in the intervening years, mainly off screen since Redemption Island? About even if it was a legend season, would he be someone that would get a callback? Where do you stand on that? If it does even veer into the idea of bringing back these Titans, do you think Russell is getting a call from production?
I mean, it's hard to read production's mind because sometimes you will straight up ask them a question about a season or a thing they want to do, and they'll tell you one answer. Then a year later, you'll find out they were completely wrong or lying. Like I'll never forget when I asked Jeff Probst straight up in the middle of a 5-hour immunity challenge, "Would you ever do an all winner season?" He said, "No, absolutely not." And then 1 year later, he's filming it. So I have no read on. So my guess is that while people like Jeff have their favorites and high non-favorites that they don't want to bring back, there is Russell has such a reputation in the lore of Survivor that I think it's not inconceivable that a higher up production person is like, hey, like who maybe doesn't even follow Survivor that closely. I remember that Russell guy; he was great. Get him back. Like I can see that happening, and maybe Jeff's like, maybe can we not do that? I have no idea, but I would not rule out Russell Hanson from being called by production. From a me standpoint as a viewer, what I would want to see is if Russell changes up his game at all. And so
Mm,
far, we've seen him play 3 times, and a fourth time on another series, and it really feels like he has his really strong set of skills that people have all seen
yep.
and that currently have a limitation. So like I would challenge Russell if he gets that call to go back. It's like, please do something that's gonna try to push you over that limit, and maybe something a little bit different. I would challenge him to do that.
So we'll talk about it in a little bit. I mean, Evie made it a point to not put him on the short list. Would you
Oh,
do
really?
so for this?
It's now up to me whether Russell is on the
Yeah.
short list.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're the single-handed person, or we could keep
single.
kicking the can and leave it up to the
I,
listeners. But yeah,
I would never try to overrule Evie and say no. Russell goes on. Now that was his shot. It is not my job to overrule people.
all right, well, let's move up the row here to Stephanie Valencia because you talk about someone like Ashley and thinking about, okay, did production see enough in her? And if so, why wasn't she on the second chance ballot? Someone that this was the case for was Stephanie, who was left on the outskirts of Zapatera from day dot, pretty much. And when Russell left, the writing was pretty much on the wall. And Stephanie put up a fight. She was incredibly vocal to her tribe and to the other tribe about how much she hates them, how much she thinks they're bad players, etc. And I do think it was that persnicketiness and that mouthiness that ended up getting a call back, as well as maybe the idea again of, oh, how would she do if she was not on a tribe that, granted, I think due to her own actions, like she is not blameless in the least. And in fact, I'll admit, I became quite frustrated at Stephanie at certain points because she was kind of coming in from the angle of like, you're not playing the game. What are you doing? When I think in her case, playing the game is please work with me so I can stay. But again, there was something there with production nearly 10 years ago. Stephanie has said in her quarantine questionnaire that it is something she would want to do. She says, well, she does say, at this point in my life, I really don't have it in me. Honest to God, the entire process is very harsh on your body. My immune system hasn't been the same since. Maybe I would. I don't know. I go back and forth, as she quite literally did in her answer. She does say, though, that since her season, she pretty much doesn't watch Survivor anymore. She says that basically for her, she can't help but put herself in contestants' shoes, and I think get a little angry that she hasn't had the chance to play again. So, on the one hand, yeah, maybe there's a chance to bring back somebody that, as you said before, is hungry for the return. On the other hand, is she gonna walk in completely bum puzzled as to what the new era has become and all these twists because then she hasn't watched the show in over 10 years?
Yeah, I'm actually high on Stephanie Valencia as
Hmm.
a person I would want to like, and I mostly because I when I'm reading these questionnaires, I'm saying like people say probably, maybe. I feel like that can change once you get a call from Jeff Probst saying, we're really interested. Would you want to come back? Like that.
That yeah,
That's
that's
something
the
like
for the sake of this experiment, I only really take people out of no when they are like a hard
no.
no or they provide very specific stipulation. Otherwise, everyone is at least a soft yes for me.
Right. And I think that you're talking about like so let me just say overall, Stephanie is one of the people I'm watching the show. I was like, I am seeing what production sees in her. She has a spark in her confessionals. She is um she's thinking about the game. She certainly had a game plan, which was basically be the intentional Natalie White,
Mhm.
and which I thought was a clever and interesting way
Yeah, I'm pretty
to
sure
try to
Russell
play that.
actually approaches her with that pitch, right? He's like, "Y'all remember when I joined up with Natalie and Parvati? How about you, Stephanie?"
Yeah, and so I think that makes a lot of sense that why production wanted her back for a second chance. I think that unlike maybe I think that more so even than Ashley Underwood, like I saw something in Confessional that I was like, oh, this course can be entertaining. And if she and I can imagine if she got the call saying, hey, you want to go back whenever, she's gonna at least watch a couple of seasons and know what's happening. I mean, she's not dumb. It's just like, okay, there are these things going on. So like to me, she actually supersedes like an Ashley Underwood for
Mm.
me as someone I would put on the list just because of what even in her short time out, I've actually seen it even more so than what I saw in Kelly Wentworth at the time, who I also liked, and she came back to be, now is one of is one of the people the players that people think is some of their favorites. So
All right. Well, Christian, the time has come. We've talked through a lot of possibilities, a lot of maybes. I think we've come in with one rubber stamp on Boston Rob. Who else are we giving the stamp to, though? Give me one person that you would feel confident putting on the list.
well, just from a risk minimization standpoint, someone who I think is going to be good. Andrea would be a person that I'd like. She's never been bad on a season, in my opinion. She's always going to be understand how the TV show works and understands how the game works and is going to try. So I think that Andrea makes a lot of sense. I do want to hear your opinion of the outside pick of a Stephanie Valencia. I want to see how crazy of an idea that is to put on the ballot.
I mean, Christian, I know at the time of recording this, you're not aware of a lot of other people that have put on the ballot. Certainly not the craziest, and I'm not completely mad at it because the thing is, we know again that this is somebody that was in relatively recent contention. Obviously, was not called back for something like Game Changers or they shouldn't really have any other opportunities after that, but was somebody that at least at the time was on production's radar. She is obviously in a bit of a different state now. She was 25 when she played. She's 39 now. And I think she has her life a bit more considerably in gear, as is talked about in her quarantine questionnaire. So I think there is also a different sense that she could bring into the game. I'm not completely upset with the idea of putting Stephanie Valencia on, where I think if we look at these three that we would allow onto the ballot, you have, of course, like the 1A perhaps list of legends in Boston Rob Mariano. You have someone who has been given multiple shots in Andrea that could be interesting to see again. And then you have sort of this wild card. Well, they were out pre merge, but there's enough potential that maybe they should be given another shot in Stephanie. as much as I think someone like Ashley or Mike might have some potential as well, I would probably, from an entertainment perspective, put Stephanie in above those two.
That's what I am rating this based on, because certainly Mike and Ashley Underwood were greater threats to the potential domination of Boston Rob, and they do deserve kudos for that. Certainly, in my book, if you're going to try to put together a television show with season 50, I think that I'm going to value at least what you gave me in the confessionals and entertainment value. So to me, that would be Boston Rob, Andrea, Stephanie Valencia, with an honorable mention to Ashley Underwood and Mike.
Yeah, and that throws a bone to Natalie as well, just to
And they
see
have, yeah,
again, how her life has changed, and who knows? I'm sure y'all have thoughts as well. Last thing I want to bring up here, Christian, is who is somebody from this season that you would want to see on another reality show? Boston Rob on Traders does not count. That one
okay,
is we can't count
cheating.
real things that have actually happened.
Oh, I mean, Mike would be on one of those like World's Toughest Test kind of shows. I think
Hmm.
that he would be a good fit. Or Frank, I don't know where Christina Kell is in her life, but she seems really tough for one of those shows. No one else here has done what like any of the dating shows or anything like that. Sometimes people go on to
Oh,
those
but
kinds of
put
things.
David Murphy on one of the dating shows.
Done. David Murphy. I'll tell you. You know what,
Put him on
David
like
Murphy.
Perfect Match on Netflix.
I want David Murphy on like The Mole. I want something where David
Ooh.
Murphy is like, or one of those social deduction games. Like, I mean, The Traders is a bit of like a celebrity show
Yeah.
nowadays, but like the Mole or something where David Murphy is convinced he knows who the mole is, and he's either going to look like an evil genius or an evil dunce. And I think we're either one of those. I think I would be interested to see.
All right. So we have walked away from this podcast with three more names on the wish list: Rob Mariano at 48, Andrea Belke at 35, Stephanie Valencia at 39. I also will say, God, I hope if Andrea gets voted on to this season, that it does not end up being a bad season. Because if she is unfortunately kind of, I know you're a science guy, correlation does not equal causation, but she has not had
Sure.
the best run in terms of her quality of seasons that she's appeared on.
And she said that. I remember I felt I don't know what heard her say. She was like on Game Changers. She was talking to one of the other contestants at the time, and they were like, "This season's really good." And she was like, "What are you talking about? This
Yeah.
season is terrible." While she's on the season, I was like, "Oh, poor Andrea." I mean, like as poor as you can be going out to be a 3-time Survivor player, but like I feel it. I
Well,
feel you, Andrea. That that would be
if
yes.
Buster Rob has taught us anything, though, it's that the fourth time can sometimes reverse the curse. And so maybe Andrea would get this opportunity. But that is up to you all out there. So that's going to do it for this week of the Survivor 50 wish list. Of course, we are ending the week a little bit shorter because of the July 4th holiday. Take a long weekend for everybody, get some nice respite all around. And then we'll come back on Monday to cover Survivor South Pacific, which I think people on paper regard as like the copy paste of Redemption Island. Two returning players of Redemption Island season, one tribe pagongs their way to the end, etc. In my opinion, there's a lot more there, and I'll be excited to get into all there with Christian, your good friend and fellow David versus Goliath cast member Gabby Pescuzzi.
Good get, good get. I love talking with Gabby about the show and anything, and she's got such wonderful takes. You're gonna have a great time with her.
Do you have anybody on your short list off the top of your head from South Pacific you'd want to see come back?
Look, I'm actually an Aussie apologist,
Hmm.
amongst other things. I haven't thought about this deeply, but I think that people. I know we've seen a lot of Ozzy, and maybe you can say the same thing about him about Russell, where you see him play a very similar game. I think that I just want to give him a little bit of flowers in the sense that he people forget that the guy almost won his first season. He was one
Hmm.
vote away from winning his first season, and arguably was one challenge away from winning South Pacific. I think people, at least in our community, I'm not sure if everyone gives him proper credit for those just because he had been so oversaturated for so long. I'm not saying he should be on 50 necessarily. I haven't given it that much thought, but I do want to say that about Ozzy.
All right, so we'll talk about Ozzy, Coach, and much more on Monday. In the meantime, Christian, I know that at the time this is coming out, you might have something in the pipeline following the holiday weekend. What do you have to plug?
Yes, yes. Me and Rom Cesternino are doing another edition of Ask Dr. Hubicki coming out in a few days. So if you have questions that we want me and Rob to ask, science questions, engineering questions, reality show questions, or just anything in general, you can have your questions considered by going to robhasawebsite.com/ask Dr. Hubicki, AskDrHubicki, if you want to get your question answered on the show. So look forward to seeing you there in a few days.
Yes, so excited. That's one of my favorite podcasts. I feel like I learn so much as opposed to some of these other podcasts where we're just talking reality TV malarkey, but we've had so much fun getting to do it. We obviously haven't reached the complete halfway point of this project, but taking the long weekend is an opportunity for me to reflect back onto it. And it's been such an incredible time getting to relitigate all of these older seasons, especially alongside you, Christian, and our various amounts of guests. And I will tease, look, if you're going to be missing the wish list over the long weekend, maybe stick around Friday morning in particular for a surprise that might drop in your feed to commemorate the milestone that we have reached. Otherwise, we'll be back on Monday to resume the routine with Gabby Pascuzzi covering South Pacific. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a happy 4th of July to those who celebrate. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye bye.